Hello, welcome to the FCC's Supply Chain Reimbursement Program webinar. Excuse me. We are really excited to be here today to show you all the hard work that's been going on behind the scenes to get this $1.9 billion program ready to go. We'll be walking through the program, talking about some FAQs that we've had, and also showing you the webinar portal so that you can prepare for the filing application window to open when it opens up later this year. To start off, we have two special guests. First, Acting Special Counsel to the Acting FCC Chairwoman, Jessica Rosenworcel, Trent Harkrader, will be speaking on behalf of the Chairwoman's office. And then FCC Bureau Chief Chris Monteith will join us after that. Trent, we look forward to hearing what you have to say. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Justin. Good morning, and thank you to everyone for joining us and for all that you do to build and operate our communications networks. There is no task at the Federal Communications Commission or in any part of the federal government that is more important than keeping the American people safe and connected. You could make the case that task has never been more complex for the FCC than it is right now. Thanks to 5G and new wireless technologies, we are exponentially increasing the connections between people and the things around us. All of this connectivity creates new opportunities, but also new vulnerabilities. That's why we have prioritized working with our federal partners and the private sector to increase the security and resiliency of our nation's communications network. And we will not have secure networks in the United States if we do not first have a secure communications supply chain. It's why the Commission's recent efforts to improve network security are so important. We launched the first ever inquiry in the United States into an open radio access networks, or Open RAN. There's good reason to think that disaggregating the RAN can bring real benefits to our networks by diversifying the global supply chain, increasing competition, and reducing the potential for dependence on a single vendor. We've prohibited the use of federal funds from the agency's subsidy programs, including our Universal Service Fund, to purchase equipment that poses a national security threat to the United States. To do so, we published a first of its kind list of communications equipment and services that pose an unacceptable risk to national security, that is informed by determinations from our partners in expert agencies across the government. This is one of several steps the Commission is taking to support a coordinated approach throughout the government to addressing these issues. But of course, it's not enough to block carriers from using untrusted vendors to build out new networks. We need to remove untrustworthy equipment from our communications networks wherever it may exist. And that brings us to the subject of today's webinar. Many of you have joined us because you will soon undertake the complex task of removing Huawei and ZTE equipment and services from your networks. You will evaluate base station after base station, router after router, to ensure that the American public is no longer vulnerable to untrusted network equipment and services. This will not be simple. Removing insecure equipment from existing networks after installation is challenging because historically these systems have been closed and deeply integrated with little opportunity to mix and match equipment from different vendors. In some cases, this will mean starting over from scratch. Thanks to the Secure and Trusted Communications Networks Act and a nearly $1.9 billion appropriation from Congress, we are making support available so you can do this job right. So today, I have the privilege of officially announcing that you will soon be able to get that support. On October 29th, so just a little over 1 month from now, we will officially open the filing window for the $1.9 billion reimbursement program. And we've also heard your feedback on the importance of providing sufficient time for providers to get organized, to evaluate their vendor options, and submit their applications. So this filing window will stay open until January 14th of next year. Make no mistake, the time is now to remove this equipment from our networks, but this extra time will ensure we can all do this right. Today's webinar represents the start of this process. I know this can be daunting, but that is exactly why we have assembled a team of people today who will walk you through the application, the reimbursement systems, and answer your questions. So a big thank you to the FCC staff who have worked hard to design this program and get it up and running. Working together, I know we can build a more secure 5G future. So let's make it happen. Back over to you, Justin.
Thank you so much, Trent. Now I'm going to throw it over to Chris Monteith, WCB Bureau Chief, for some comments.
Thank you, Justin. Good morning, all. My name is Chris Monteith, and I have the honor and privilege of serving as the Chief of the Wireline Competition Bureau. Welcome to the Supply Chain Reimbursement Program webinar. I'm excited we have this opportunity to share the details of the $1.9 billion reimbursement program, the result of a significant amount of work by many in the Wireline Competition Bureau, as well as across the Commission. Over the next couple of years, the Commission will act to reimburse those participating in this program for their reasonable expenses incurred in removing, replacing, and disposing of Huawei and ZTE equipment and services. I want to take a minute to echo Trent's remarks and thank you for your hard work in getting us to this point. As Trent just announced, the filing window will open on October 29th, giving us just a little bit over a month before you can begin to input your information to remove, replace, and dispose of insecure communications equipment and services. I can attest that we have worked diligently to get to this point. We first opened this proceeding in 2018 with a notice of proposed rulemaking. Since then, the Commission has released 2 further notices of proposed rulemaking, 3 reports and orders, and countless public notices. This is a testament to the importance of this proceeding. Americans rely on their communications network for everything from work to healthcare to education to entertainment to staying connected with friends and family. However, these benefits are only available if our networks are secure. Opening the filing window and thus the reimbursement program process that will follow after we review your applications will go a long way towards mitigating the risks that currently exist via Huawei and ZTE equipment and services. I'll pass it back to Justin to share more about the reimbursement program. I did just want an opportunity to welcome you to our webinar, to wish you a successful webinar, and to thank the staff for their incredible work in putting together not only this webinar, but all of the work that's gone into this proceeding heretofore. Justin, back to you.
Thank you so much, Chris. So now that we've heard from our speakers of honor, I'll take a quick moment to introduce myself. I'm Justin Fall, Acting Associate Bureau Chief in the Wireline Competition Bureau. And part of my portfolio is overseeing our supply chain proceeding for the Commission, including the Supply Chain Reimbursement Program. But we have a great team that's been working with us, working hard on this, and I wish they could all be here to deserve some credit for all the work they've been doing. I'm going to share a presentation now that will walk through the supply chain proceeding, the program, and then we'll walk, as I said before, we'll do a walkthrough of the actual portal before going to some frequently asked questions and trying to answer some of the questions we've been hearing from you already. So I'm going to share that now. And so for everyone who's interested in this presentation, we'll be posting this presentation alongside the video from this webinar on the FCC event webpage that you went to come to this webinar. Additionally, we will be loading the link to this presentation and the webinar on our fcc.gov supply chain website, which is the website that has all the information about the reimbursement program, all of our information about our proceeding, and any other information you might need to know about the covered list or any supply chain related questions. So that should be the website you go to if you have questions, and you'll be able to find this and a number of other important documents and information there as well. So I'll walk through our agenda, what we're going to do today. We'll start off by talking about how important the reimbursement program is to our national security, something you heard echoed both from Trent and Chris. We're going to go over the reimbursement program, including program eligibility, what is reimbursable, and a program timeline. We're going to talk about how to apply, how do you actually get allocated funding, and important for many of the people who are attending this webinar, how are you going to be reimbursed? Last, we'll talk about a few of the reporting requirements that recipients are going to need to follow before breaking into frequently asked questions. And then, although we hope to have a Q&A option available, what we will be able to do is using our supply chain reimbursement program help desk. You can submit questions there and we will review them and either add to our frequently asked questions document or reach out to you directly to try to help answer your question. So let's talk about the importance of the reimbursement program. In the third report and order that was adopted by the Commission in July of 2021, Acting Chairwoman Rosenworcel stated that the FCC will soon undertake what is perhaps the most significant federally funded effort to rebuild and secure commercial communications networks, including removing interior equipment. Later, she added that the program provides an opportunity to jumpstart U.S. innovation in this critical technology. And we thank carriers, you, for participating and working alongside them for the duration of the program. So let's talk about the reimbursement program a little bit. The reimbursement program was created by the Secure and Trusted Communications Networks Act of 2019. The Secure Networks Act, as I'll refer to it throughout the presentation, directs the Federal Communications Commission to establish the Secure and Trusted Communications Networks Reimbursement Program, or Reimbursement Program for short. The reimbursement program aims to secure the nation's communications supply chain and to protect national security by reimbursing eligible providers for the removal, replacement, and disposal of communications equipment and services that pose a threat to the security of our nation's communications networks. Now, the Secure Networks Act did not fund the reimbursement program, so Congress, in the Consolidated Appropriations Act 2021, appropriated $1.9 billion to implementing the Secure Networks Act, including $1.895 billion for funding the reimbursement program itself. So now, important, who is eligible? Congress set the eligibility at providers of advanced communication service with 10 million or fewer customers that have obtained Huawei or ZTE equipment and services on or before June 30th, 2020. An advanced communication service means a high-speed switched broadband telecommunications capability that enables users to originate and receive high-quality voice, data, graphics, and video telecommunications using any technology with a connection speed of at least 200 kilobytes per second in either direction. So importantly, that's fixed or mobile. It's not just one or the other. In addition to eligible telecommunications carriers, who are carriers that receive universal service funding, providers of advanced communication service could include schools, libraries, healthcare providers, or consortiums thereof, to the extent that the providers use or provide broadband service to end users. So customer means those customers of the provider and customers of any affiliate that receive advanced communication service as of the date the application is filed. And eligibility will be validated using FCC Form 477 information. So we'll discuss later what this means for applicants that have not filed a Form 477. But and for those who aren't familiar, FCC Form 477 is the local telephone competition and broadband reporting form, which is filed and will be used to verify our eligibility. What type of equipment and services are reimbursable? Participants can be reimbursed for costs reasonably incurred for the removal, replacement, and disposal of Huawei and ZTE equipment or services that are obtained on or before June 30th of 2020. The June 30th of 2020 date is the day that the FCC's Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau released orders designating Huawei and ZTE as a threat to our communications networks and communication supply chain under our 2019 First Report and Order Authority. Reimbursement program recipients can be reimbursed for costs that are reasonably incurred for the removal, placement, and disposal of wall-wear ZT equipment, and costs that are incurred prior to April 17th, 2018 are not reimbursable. So to help participants who are going to be looking at this process determine what reimbursable costs, what we're going to look at for reimbursement, we created a catalog of eligible expenses, which we call the cost catalog, which has a list of program eligible Huawei and ZTE equipment and services. The cost catalog contains categories of costs that are expected to be incurred in the remove, replacement, and disposal process. And RRD is a shorthand for remove, replace, dispose. And the cost catalog includes a detailed list of core and non-core equipment and services that are eligible for reimbursement and their associated predetermined costs. Okay, so what is reimbursable? A little bit more information. The cost of replacement facilities is reasonable if the replacement facilities are covered and comparable to those in use by the provider prior to the removal, replacement, and disposal of covered communications equipment services. And consideration of costs reasonably incurred is going to be decided on a case-by-case basis based upon the information you provide in the application process. And the reason why we're using the cost reasonably incurred standard is that is what Congress required us to do in the Secure and Trusted Communications Networks Act. Now, we do recognize that a certain degree of upgrade may be entirely reasonable and eligible for reimbursement depending on the comparable replacements available in the marketplace. So a good example of this is if you have a 2G or 3G mobile network, replacing that network with a 4G LTE equipment or a service that is 5G ready is treated as comparable replacement. We talked about this a little bit further in the third report in order, which was adopted in July of 2021, in paragraphs 86 to 92. So make sure to check that out if you have questions about what may or may not be deemed a reasonably incurred cost or an upgrade. So a little bit of information about our program timeline. So we announced a target date of October 29, 2021 to open the filing window. And as you just heard from Trent, we will be opening the window on that announced target date. Originally, we had said the filing window will be at least 60 days, but as Trent just announced, we will be keeping the window open until January 14th, 2022. So it's additional, longer than 60 days in response to the record requests that we've heard from a number of providers and manufacturers to give applicants enough time to gather the information they need to fully complete their applications. The official filing window dates will be announced by a public notice, which will go out immediately after the end of this webinar. So as soon as you stop listening to me talk, head over to the FCC's website and you'll be able to see the public notice that will have all the information. So the timeline in and of itself, the filing window is going to open, like I said, on October 29th. So applications, including your cost estimates, need to be submitted via the reimbursement online portal, which is going to be available at fcc.gov/supply chain. The FCC form you'll be using is FCC form 5640, which was released to the public on our August 3rd policies and procedures public notice. That is also available on fcc.gov/supply chain if you'd like to go and look at that now. The filing window is going to close on January 14th, as we said. At that point, applications can no longer be amended. The FCC and the Supply Chain Reimbursement Program Fund Administrator, which is Ernst & Young, will begin reviewing the applications for eligibility and estimated costs. The applicants can receive further or may receive requests for further information if the FCC or the Fund Administrator has questions as they are reviewing the applications. In the first quarter of 2022, the FCC is going to be communicating with providers that are found to be initially eligible and initially ineligible to participate in the program based upon that review. Those applicants who are found to be initially deficient to participate in the program will have the opportunity to provide additional information to the FCC and the Fund Administrator regarding their application before a final determination is made on their eligibility. So this could be anything, including some missing information that does not allow us to determine whether a cost is reasonably incurred, an estimate that is not supported, or there could just be errors in the application that we've identified that we'll need you to fix. So based upon the comprehensive review of the applications in early second quarter 2022, we will release the final list of eligible applicants and their amount of funding allocation that's available for reimbursement. This is going to be done both by public notice as well as email to the applicants, and we'll talk a little bit about this later on in the presentation. And program participants can begin submitting initial invoices for actual costs incurred and receive reimbursement for approved submissions as soon as that funding allocation public notice and announcement goes out. Important, and we'll talk about this further on as well, the first reimbursement claim request does not have to be submitted right away. However, applicants will have to submit their first request within 1 year of the allocation. How to apply. We're going to talk about the process of actually getting your application in so you can start receiving your reimbursement. Prior to the filing window opening, applicants need to go to the Reimbursement Program website, which is fcc.gov/supply chain. You're going to hear me reference that a bunch in this presentation. That is the website where you will be spending a lot of time. All the information that you need to know about program eligibility and requirements is there. You should start, if you haven't already, consulting our orders, including the 2021 supply chain order, which was released in July, the 2020 supply chain order, excuse me, the December 2020 supply chain order, which was released in December, our Reimbursement Program Policies and Procedures public notice, which was released in August, about a month ago, and the cost catalog. You can also start going ahead now, there's no need to wait, to compile vendor quotes, invoices, and other documentation, and confirm you're registered in sam.gov. And we'll talk about the sam.gov process a little bit later as well. On October 29th, when the filing window opens, eligible providers will be able to go on fcc.gov/supply chain to access the form 5640 and to submit your, to begin submitting your application information. So when you go to that website, fcc.gov/supply chain, you will see right now it does not have a link to the portal, but when the time is right, there will be a portal link right front and center. You won't have to look around for it. We want to make this as easy as possible for you as you are starting to work on getting the information in. So, excuse me. We are now going to walk through the application process for the reimbursement program. The FCC is going to release a public notice announcing the opening date for the filing window. That'll be later today after this webinar ends. Applicants will file an application request for funding allocation with an estimate of expenses and support for those estimates. You can use the catalog of eligible expenses, which is available, as we've said, at fcc.gov/supply chain. Additionally, you're going to have to certify in the application a number of different certifications, a few of which are that you have a plan for the permanent removal and replacement of any covered communications equipment or service that is in the communications network of the provider as of the date that you file the submission, and the disposal of the equipment or services, and a specific timeline for the permanent removal, replacement, and disposal of the covered communications equipment or service, which is included as part of the application. So a couple of things there. The plan for the removal is important because Congress has given eligible providers 1 year following their first disbursement to complete the process of removing, replacing, and disposing of the Huawei and ZTE equipment. And so we recognize that that is a very tight window. So in your application, you need to show that you have a plan set out how you're going to meet that 1 year deadline. We'll talk about potential extension requests later, but the 1 year time frame, since it was set by Congress, is very important. So carriers should start pulling their information together and their plan together with the expectation that it will be completed within 1 year. Now, there are other ways to set everything up so that you don't have to rush it through in 1 year. So we have announced the filing window is going to open on October 29th. It will close on January 14th. So if you haven't already, start pulling together your quotes, your vendor information, look at what's in your network and the equipment and services that will be being removed, pull that information together. So we have some time there. The FCC, I'll talk about how we're going to review the applications in a moment. But there's going to be some time while the FCC is reviewing the applications that you can continue to pull your information together as the applicant so that you're prepared to go. Once we release the allocations, there will be some time. You have 1 year following the announcement of the allocation amount that you receive before you have to take your first allocation. So if you need, you can take that full year as long as you take your first disbursement before the expiration of that year to start prepping and pulling everything together so that when you do take that first allocation, you can complete it within the year of taking the first allocation. So please be mindful of that timeline. What's going to be required in the application? An estimate of the costs reasonably incurred for the permanent removal, replacement, and disposal of covered communications equipment or service from the eligible providers network. So providers may rely upon the predetermined costs identified in the catalog of eligible expenses, the cost catalog. Eligible providers that submit their own costs estimates must submit supporting documentation and certify that the estimate is made in good faith. An important caveat to that is that the FCC in the third report and order determined that applicants who are going to be using the catalog of eligible expenses to rely upon their estimates to show that they are reasonable must show an estimate that is no higher than the average cost of the range included in the catalog of eligible expenses. So to break that down a little bit, the cost catalog includes a range of reasonable expenses for each particular equipment or service that's going to be replaced. And the reason is that there are a number of variables that go into different networks and network sizes, location, all sorts of different variables that mean the cost has to be reasonably fluid. But rather than just allowing carriers to come in and estimate that their expense is going to be at the very highest end, we have analyzed the situation and realized that if that was the case, then there was no incentive for carriers not to come in and estimate their cost at the highest amount, which would ultimately be a challenge because when you go to be reimbursed, you will only be reimbursed for the actual costs incurred. So if a carrier had estimated that replacing their core was going to cost $10, but it actually only ended up being cost $4, then you may have been allocated extra money, but that doesn't mean you have that extra money to use. What it does mean is, unfortunately, that those $6 would not have been available for us to allocate to another carrier who may need it and now would no longer have that amount to be reimbursing. So to ensure that the carriers are not taking advantage of the cost catalog ranges, the FCC has stated that we will only allow carriers who are relying upon the cost catalog to rely upon an estimate based on the catalog if it is below the 50% average of the range for that particular equipment or service. If the estimate is above the 50% range, that's fine, but carriers must submit their own cost estimate, must submit as part of that cost estimate, supporting documentation to justify why the estimate is above the average range. On the application process, you also have to include detailed information on the covered communications equipment or service that's being removed, replaced, and disposed of. As I had mentioned before, a few certifications. There are other certifications that are included. And if you'd like to see all of the certifications, they are available as part of the FCC's Procedures and Policies public notice that came out on the 3rd of August. But those include certifications that estimates and other information that's provided is accurate and true to the best of the provider's knowledge, that no kickbacks are provided, for example, and that providers will only use the funds for the purposes that they state in the application. So nothing that is unreasonable, but a good thing to flag for all of you. As I mentioned before, you also have to include a specific timeline for the removal, replacement, and disposal of the covered communications equipment and service. All right, how to apply. So once the application window closes, the Secure Networks Act requires the FCC to act within 90 days of the application, with the ability to extend the deadline by 40 days if we need more time. So at a minimum, we're looking at 135 days after the application for the FCC and Ernst & Young as the program administrator to review it. Throughout the review period, any applicant with an application that is found to be deficient will have 15 days to cure the defect and so resubmit the application. So this is really important, and I want to emphasize this because ultimately, if the defect is not cured, the application will be denied, and the applicant will not be eligible to participate in this filing window or to be reimbursed in this filing window. So the only possible way that they might be able to be reimbursed in the future is if there is a second filing window that opens. And as of now, this is the only filing window that we have discussed, and the only funding that Congress has appropriated is for this current filing window. So please respond to the request for information that the program administrator sends. Do so within 15 days and ensure that your application is not defective, because we want to make sure that every applicant who is eligible who wants to participate in this program is able to do so. Following the application window closing, the Reimbursement Program Fund Administrator will conduct an initial review of the applications to help the Wireline Competition Bureau determine which applications are initially considered eligible and acceptable, and we'll use that information to evaluate the gross estimate demand that's contained in the applications. So we're going to be reviewing the applications. Once we have an idea of which applications are acceptable, we will know how much demand there is out of the $1.9 billion, and we'll be able to go and start prepping the allocations. So I'm going to take a break from showing you the presentation, and we're going to walk through the Secure and Trusted Communications Network's reimbursement filing portal, which is how applicants will actually apply. So on October 29th, you are going to go to fcc.gov/supply chain, and please do not worry about the website link showing on top, because the website is not live yet. So that is our internal website link. You will see that a detailed reimbursement program FCC form 5640 user guide and other helpful resources, such as our orders, public notices, and FAQs, are available on the program website prior to it opening. After accessing the landing page at fcc.gov/supply chain, applicants will navigate to the SCRP filing portal button, which you'll see on the screen right now. Once you click that, applicants will be able to either start a new application or return to their previously started application. So you see on there, they're either going to be the blue start, or underneath the program participant files will be there. New applicants will click the blue Start New Application Request for Funding Allocation button. You will see this page pop up. Applicants can also save their application and return to it later in order to submit before the filing deadline. Applicants who have started an application will navigate to the program files to select their application, which was on the last page. So important, you do not have to fill this out all in one. Right? Please save the information, come back, double check it, and make sure it's accurate before submitting. After opening the filing application, applicants will arrive at the SCRP Application Request for Funding Allocation page, which is where we are right now. They'll be prompted to input their applicant information. Applicants are encouraged to submit a single application at the holding company level, although they can apply at the individual subsidiary level. If you're going to apply at the holding company level, then the holding company FRN should be used here. If applying at the subsidiary level, then the subsidiary company FRN should be used there. So here's an example FRN, which we're going to use to show you for purposes of the demonstration. Next, applicants will be asked to input their applicant payment information, including the DUNS code, the DUNS code, and commercial government entity CAGE code. Applicants that do not have a DUNS code and a CAGE code are encouraged to register for those identifiers as soon as possible. You can do so today after this webinar is over, as they do take some time to obtain. These are also mandatory in order to register with sam.gov, which is the program eligibility requirement to participate in the program. More information and resources on the process can be found in the FAQs and will be included in the user guide, which will be published before the filing window opens. Next, applicants will input the FRN for the real party in interest. As previously mentioned, applicants may submit a single application at the holding company level, or you can apply at the individual subsidiary level, although we would like you to file, if possible, at the holding company level. Applicants applying at the holding company level will input the same FRN here as provided in the applicant information section. In other words, when you're applying at the holding company level, the applicant FRN and the real party in interest FRN would be the same. In this case, the applicant will need to upload the attachments section of the application, a list of the FRNs of the subsidiaries covered by the application. You can see on the screen right now how you'll be able to add that. Applicants applying at the individual subsidiary level will input their holding company's FRN in this section. So next we'll be going to the contact information of the individual completing the application or the contact of the, contact for the reimbursement program. Applicants should ensure that the contact listed here is easily reachable by email and telephone. Should the FCC or the fund administrator need to follow up with questions, as we just discussed, it is very important that in the extent of a request for information, that the applicant respond promptly. So please make sure that this individual will be available at a minimum during the filing window period when it's open, as well as during the 90 or 135-day review process that the FCC will be undertaking following the January 14th closing period. We're next going to go to applicant type. Here, applicants will identify their applicant type. You can select up to 3 applicant identification types from the drop-down menu. You see some examples: state government, independent school district, individual, small business. There are a number of possibilities that should cover any potential applicant. The applicant will also identify the primary U.S. state, District of Columbia, or territory from a drop-down menu in which reimbursement program support will be applied. The applicant will answer yes or no to the questions that are displayed below on the screen. And for most applicants, the answer to the first question of whether they are a commercial broadband provider will be yes. However, applicants that answer no to this question will need to provide supporting documentation in the attachment section, which is the bottom of the portal, to justify why they are eligible for the program, yet do not identify as an advanced communication service provider or commercial broadband provider. So next, we'll go to program eligibility. Applicants will then answer a yes or no to 3 questions to help determine program eligibility. Now, this section is very important as it helps the FCC and the fund administrator to determine your ability to participate in the program. So please answer to the best of your knowledge. FCC Form 477, which requires all facilities-based broadband providers to file data with the FCC twice a year on which on where they offer internet services at speeds exceeding 200 kilobytes per second at least one direction, will be used to verify eligibility. Applicants that answer yes to the first and/or second questions, but have not filed a recent FCC Form 477, will need to provide supporting documentation in the attachment section, which is the bottom of the portal, to demonstrate that they are a provider of advanced communication services. Supporting documentation could include information from the applicant's website that describes services provided to customers, a catalog of services provided to customers, or annual public financial records or reports demonstrating the number of customers and/or the broadband services that are provided. Applicants that answer that they have more than 10 million customers will need to upload supporting documentation in the attachment section to explain why they believe they are eligible for the program. Applicants will receive a warning message in red if they answer no to the first or last question and will not be considered eligible for the program. And as always, more information on program eligibility and the types of acceptable documentation for this section can be found on the Reimbursement Program website, fcc.gov/supply-chain, and in the frequently asked questions that we will be releasing. Next, we'll look at timeline and plan information. In this section, applicants will upload attachments to detail their timeline and project plan to remove, replace, and dispose of the covered equipment or services. The timeline attachment should include major milestones and the planned durations that are significant to the purchase, removal, installation, and disposal of any equipment or services for which applicants are seeking reimbursement. This document can be in any electronic format and should also specify the reimbursable items from the cost catalog or the estimates related to each major milestone in the remove, replace, and dispose process. The project plan attachment should also provide an outline or description of the applicant's plan and the major project activities for the permanent removal, replacement, and disposal of covered communications equipment or service. This document can also be in any format and may be similar to a project work breakdown structure at level 1 and 2 only, or a high-level Gantt chart, although this is not a requirement. Applicants will have the option to submit confidential and public/redacted versions of their timeline and plan, but they must upload a request for confidentiality in the attachments section if they choose to do so. Note that the confidential rules and the information surrounding what needs to be done in that request for confidentiality are available on our FCC website. So let's talk about locations next. Applicants will have to add locations where they have equipment and services that will be removed, replaced, and disposed. I cannot overemphasize that this is a critically important section of the application, because the information provided here will link to the information provided in the next two sections, where applicants list their existing and replacement equipment and the associated cost estimates. Applicants must first input or upload their locations before moving on to the equipment or cost estimates section of the application, as the locations entered here will automatically generate a location ID that will be matched against the equipment and cost estimates that the applicant enters in the following section. So specifically, for each location, the applicants will have to provide the location name, the address, the latitude and longitude using WGS84 data, and the location type that's chosen from the drop-down box. Applicants should only enter locations once, but upload all locations where they'll ultimately be seeking reimbursement for equipment or services. If applicants have consumer premises equipment, or CPE, locations, those should be entered as one location with the type other, using a location in the center of the applicant's coverage area. This location will be used during the later sections. So just to reiterate, if applicants have CPE equipment locations, please enter those as one location with the type other, using a location in the center of your coverage area. Once all locations have been entered, applicants may download their locations and location IDs by choosing Download Locations CSV file. There are many important details related to how to input locations that will be included in the user guide. Applicants are encouraged to refer to the user guide when they are completing their application. So let's talk about equipment next. Next, applicants will upload details of each piece of equipment, including both existing and replacement equipment. Applicants must input their equipment, matching each piece to a location ID generated based on the locations entered in the previous sections. In turn, the cost estimates provided in the following section, cost estimates, will be linked to the equipment added here. For existing equipment, applications will be required to upload supporting documentation, such as the purchase order or photograph, to confirm that the equipment currently exists in their network. See the requirement to upload it right there on the screen. Replacement equipment does not require supporting documentation. In the attachment section, applicants should provide supporting documentation, such as architecture or network configuration diagram or equipment inventory lists with asset level identification, for example, serial numbers, to show how the equipment fits into the overall network. Now, professional services will not be listed in this section. Rather, professional services should be included in the next section, which is cost estimates. Here in this section, applicants will be uploading details of each cost estimate. Applicants must input their cost estimates after completing the previous section. So please complete the other sections first. Applicants will be required to match their cost estimates to the locations and equipment and/or services entered in the previous 2 sections. Applicants' cost estimates will become the basis for their allocation. Estimates may be associated with a specific location or identified as non-site specific. Any estimates associated with CPE equipment should be identified as being associated with a single site, and applicants should choose the CPE location that was added in the location section for all CPE-related cost estimates. We'll also do professional services here. Professional services will be uploaded in this section and would generally be considered as non-site specific. More information on professional services and how to include them in the applications can be found in the FAQs and the user guide when made available. Okay, so next, I mentioned the certifications earlier. Applicants must self-certify their application by including your certifying the certifying official's name, your title, phone number, and email. The date signed will automatically populate. This section is the equivalent of electronically signing the application. Let's talk about attachments now. In this section, applicants can upload documentation that supports the other sections of the application. In addition to the specific documentation that's referenced in each section, applicants can attach any other additional documentation that they believe will be beneficial to the understanding and consideration of their application. Documentation that's referenced throughout the application should be uploaded here. These are the things that we discussed earlier, such as a list of the FRNs of the subsidiaries covered by the application, if applying at the holding company level, an explanation for why an applicant does not identify as an advanced communication service provider, supporting documentation to demonstrate an applicant is eligible for the program despite not having filed an FCC Form 477, an explanation for why the applicant has more than 10 million customers and/or didn't identify covered equipment, the request for confidentiality if necessary, importantly, supporting quotes and other cost estimate documentation, and supporting documentation of existing Huawei and ZTE equipment, including the make, the model, and the serial number. If you're uploading additional attachments, applicants will need to include a short description, the category of the attachment, which is going to come from a drop-down menu, and indicate if it is to remain confidential. Note that multiple attachments can be added. So once you put this information in, it's probably a good idea to save the application before you submit it. During your filing window, applicants may revise their application, and you can resubmit it as many times as needed. But please ensure that the most up-to-date application has been submitted before the filing window closes. Applicants can save the application as a draft by clicking on the blue Save as Draft button at the bottom of the page. So you see the Save as Draft. Alternatively, applicants can submit the application by clicking on the blue Submit button on the bottom right of the page, anytime before the filing window closes. When you do go to submit, you'll be prompted, are you sure you want to submit this application before fully submitting? So please, just to make aware for everybody, there's no benefit to submitting early. We will not be reviewing the applications that are submitted earlier before the others. And it has no benefit as far as funding allocation if you submit early. What's more important is that you submit a fully complete application that ensures that you have no material defects so that your application will be deemed eligible and granted. So please take your time and make sure that your information you include is complete rather than rushing through to submit early. But make sure that you do submit before the filing window closes, because there is no ability to participate if you do not get the application in before the filing window closes. Okay, I'm going to go back to sharing our PowerPoint and thank my colleague Jay for running through the website while we were going through the filing portal. Bear with me while I get back to our points. Okay, so you've gotten this far. You have prepared your application, you have gathered all the necessary information, you have gathered your cost estimates, and you have submitted your application within the filing windows. Let's talk now a little bit about how funding allocations will be determined and issued to successful applicants. But based on the cost estimates that are provided by the applicants, the Reimbursement Program Fund Administrator is going to recommend funding allocation for each approved application. WCB, or the Wireline Competition Bureau, is going to review each recommendation for funding allocation, and following any modifications to cure deficiencies following the 15-day cure period. Remember, that is your opportunity to cure the deficiencies that we will alert you to while we're reviewing the application. We're going to either grant or deny the application and proceed with issuing an allocation. As I mentioned before, we'll be releasing public notices that announce the funding recipients and the amount of your funding allocations. But we're also going to notify you directly by email, because we want to make sure that you know exactly when your allocation is delivered, because there is that 1-year window following notice of your allocation to take your first disbursement. So it's very important that you keep an eye on the PNs and also check your email after you filed the window. You filed your application during the window so that you don't miss that information. Okay, that's probably the most important part of the process for a lot of people. How are you actually going to file your reimbursement claims? How are we going to pay you once you have incurred the expense as part of the remove, replace, and disposing process? So once funds are allocated, recipients can then draw down the funds upon proof of actual expenses that are incurred by filing FCC Form 5640, but the reimbursement claim request. And the recipient of the allocation has to show in the reimbursement claim request that you incurred actual expenses in a reasonable manner for the removal, replacement, and disposal of covered communications equipment or services. Now, one important caveat: companies do not actually have to have paid the money. As long as they have an invoice that shows that they have incurred the expense, that is sufficient. We understand that many of these carriers are small carriers that may not have the resources to float paying all these expenses while they wait to be reimbursed. So you do not have to do that as long as you have an invoice showing that the expense is reasonably incurred and related to the removal, replacement, and disposal of the Wallwayer's ET equipment or service. You can then file that as part of your reimbursement claim. So within 1 year of the approval of your application to request for allocating funding allocation, remember, or your application to participate in the program, you must file at least one claim. So as I mentioned before, if you do not file a reimbursement claim with 1 year of the 1 year window following the period by which you're notified of your allocation amount, we will reclaim all of the allocation funding, and it will be it will come back to the reimbursement fund for possible allocations to other program participants. So if you do not take at least one disbursement, it'll all come back to us, be used for other applicants. So please, if you are trying to take as much time as possible to ensure that you can complete the 1 year timeline, as I mentioned before, file one application disbursement request for something small and just get it in so that you don't have to worry about this 1 year window. Please do not wait until the last day. Everyone is going to have a different 1 year time frame, because we'll be announcing the allocations through a variety of public notices. And so you don't want to risk filing it and having something go wrong and having the year lapse. So please do not wait to the last moment, but do so at least once within the year following your announcement of your allocation. An important time period question for all entities who are going to be filing these claims is, you may file your claim request within 120 days of the expiration of your removal, replacement, and disposal term. So as a reminder, you have 1 year to take your first allocation. Following that first allocation, you have 1 year to complete the remove, replace, and disposal process. However, you may complete the process, but still receive invoices after that period. So you have 120 days following the expiration of your 1 year remove, replace, and disposal term to file any outstanding reimbursement claim requests. Once your first disbursement occurs, like I said, you must complete the removal, replacement, and disposal within 1 year of the disbursement. So we've had a lot of talk already from interested applicants about potential extensions of the 1 year period. And the Secure and Trusted Communications Networks Act listed 2 possible extensions. The first is an FCC-wide 6-month general extension if the Commission finds that the supply of replacement communications equipment or services that is needed by recipients to achieve the purposes of the reimbursement program is inadequate to meet the needs of the recipients. So the FCC, working with program participants and other parties, is keeping an eye on the communications networks and supply chain to watch this. It will be an FCC decision, 6 months, and a one-time 6-month grant if we determine that is necessary. There are also options for individual extensions. And here the Wireline Competition Bureau can grant an extension for up to 6 months if we find that due to no fault of such recipient, that the recipient is unable to complete the permanent removal, replacement, and disposal by the end of the term. Now, we may grant more than one extension request for recipient if the circumstances warrant. And a perfect example of the type of circumstance that that may pop up would be whether if you were an applicant in an area where it is very difficult to complete some construction during certain times of the year, and your 1 year deadline would end during that time of year, that is something that would maybe a consideration that we'd want to look into. So please, if you think this is going to be a problem, let the FCC and the Wireline Communication Bureau know as early as possible so that we can be prepared and try to work with you to ensure that you can meet the deadlines set forth in the statute if extensions are necessary. So please communicate with us, let us know. We want to be an open door to work with you to make this process go as smoothly as possible. So what are some of the other and miscellaneous requirements that program participants are going to be facing as part of the Secure and Trusted Communications Networks Reimbursement Program? First, you have to remove and replace the equipment, which we've talked a lot about, but Congress also requires us to ensure disposal of covered equipment. Reimbursement program recipients must dispose of the covered communications equipment or service in a manner to prevent the equipment or service from being used in the networks of other providers of advanced communication service. This disposal must result in the destruction of the covered communications equipment or service, making the covered communications equipment or service inoperable permanently. Note that this includes both the equipment and also components. So what we do not want to see is a piece of equipment that may be rendered inoperable, but the chips and other thing be reused and replaced and put into use in other network equipment. So everything needs to be rendered inoperable. Reimbursement program recipients must retain documentation that demonstrates compliance with the requirement. And we understand that people have some questions about the disposal process, and the FCC's Wireline Competition Bureau is working on additional guidance on this process as we speak. We expect to be able to release that disposal process guidance very shortly. Okay, I talked about some of the reporting requirements that we are required to do in the Secure and Trusted Communications Networks Act. And we want to hear from you. So this is the easiest way that we can ensure that no waste, fraud, and abuse is occurring, that you are moving forward in an appropriate manner. Also, if there are issues that pop up, that's the best way for the FCC to learn about issues so that we can work with you together to ensure a positive outcome as part of the reimbursement program. First up, every 90 days, beginning on the date that the Wireline Competition Bureau approves your application and ending with your final certification, you need to file a status update. So note, this is every 90 days beginning of when we approve your allocation, meaning when you receive your disbursement allotment, not when you file your first reimbursement request. So from the beginning, every 90 days, you'll need to let us know what's going on. Spending reports. Within 10 calendar days after the end of January and July, and that is statutory language, which is why it is written in a less than normal manner. So July and January 10th, starting with your initial funded disbursement and terminating once you have filed your final spending report that shows the expenditure of all funds received as compared to the estimated cost submitted. The final spending report is expected to be filed no later than 60 days after the expiration of your claim request deadline. So keep in mind that you may have to be filing extra ones even after the deadline is passed. Make sure you get done within 60 days. The final certification is a requirement that within 10 days following the expiration of your removal, replacement, and disposal term that you'll file it, which includes whether the recipient has fully complied with all terms and conditions of the program, the commitments that you made in your application, and the timelines submitted with the application request for funding allocation or your application to participate in the program. This final certification must also indicate whether the recipient has permanently removed the covered communications equipment and service that's in its network as of the date of the application submission. So if an applicant indicates that it has not fully complied with all terms of the program, then you must file an updated final certification when you have fully complied. So an example of this would be if you have not completed all your removal replacement, or for some reason your disposal process is not completed, has not ended, you will not be able to file the final certification. You'll have to file the certification, let us know that, and then file an updated final certification once you have complied. Another important aspect of this is the deadline. I should say, I've said on the extension page, my apologies. If you do receive an extension, that extension, 6-month extension or for less period of time, will toll your 1-year window to complete the removal, replacement, and disposal process. So the final certification will be tolled as well. So those dates could, be added to depending on the extension process to maybe 1 year and 6 months, for example. Other reporting requirements. So in the Secure Trusted Communications Network in Section 5, Congress requires all providers of advanced communication service to file an annual report. The first annual report filing will be required within 90 days after our Office of Economics and Analytics issues a public notice announcing the availability of the new reporting platform. So this reporting platform is being built at the same time as our reimbursement program, and our OEA colleagues will announce when the deadline will be occurred. So keep an eye out for that public notice as we get going. Following the first one, all filers must submit reports once a year on or before March 31st using information as of December 31st of the previous year. So you might be saying, what information are we going to be including in this? You have to file as part of your report whether or not, as a provider of advanced communication service, you have any covered communications equipment or service in the network of in your network. Importantly, the covered communications equipment or service for this annual reporting requirement includes all 5 equipment and service groups on the covered list. It is not just limited to Huawei and ZTE. So as a reminder, the covered list is listed on the FCC's fcc.gov/supply chain webpage. It was required under Section 2 of the Secure and Trusted Communications Networks Act. And that list includes equipment and services that have been identified from 4 enumerated sources within our federal government colleagues that pose a threat to the United States and its people. The first initial covered list was published on March 13th, 2021, and includes equipment and services from Huawei and ZTE, as well as telecommunications equipment and services and video surveillance equipment and services that's used in specific settings from Hytera, Hikvision, and Dahua. So this annual reporting requirement that Congress required will require all providers of advanced communication service to certify that you do not have both Huawei or ZTE or those other 3 companies' equipment or service in your network after as of the December 31st of the prior year. Congress didn't want to make this a burdensome filing, so if the provider can certify that they do not have any of those equipment or services in their network, then you do not need to file an annual report the following year. However, if the provider later purchases, rents, leases, or otherwise obtains any covered communications equipment or service, then you have to start reporting again. And the other important avenue here is the covered list is a live document and can be updated to have equipment or services added or removed. So please make sure to keep an eye on the covered list, especially when the reporting period is getting closer, to make sure that the applicant does not, the carrier or the provider of events communication service does not have any of the current equipment or services listed on the covered list for this annual report. So we've been doing a lot of outreach with interested carriers to try to make this process go as smooth as possible. And we wanted to take an opportunity to share some frequently asked questions and some answers to those questions so that hopefully if other carriers have those same questions, they'll be able to have them answered before they have to reach out. Additionally, the FCC will be, the Wireline Competition Bureau will be releasing a list of frequently asked questions later today, along with a public notice announcing the filing window opening. Those will be posted on our fcc.gov/supply chain website so that you can pull up that document and ask any questions that you may have. This is a live living document as well and will be updated based upon new information or policy decisions as those come through. So first, where can providers learn more information about the reimbursement program? Well, the FCC announced earlier this month that the help desk is live. The help desk is being staffed by the program administrator, and they can help providers with questions about the filing window, the portal, and the program. Any questions that are kind of new or novel, the fund administrator will run by FCC staff, but other questions they may be able to answer just on their own, especially those technical questions regarding to the portal. You can contact the help desk in two ways. You can contact by phone at 202-418-7540, or you can email them at scrpfundadmin@fcc.gov. As I've mentioned many times, you can find all this information and more at our FCC website, fcc.gov/supply chain. Please check it out if you haven't already. There's a ton of great information there. And we listed a couple of the more important documents on this page. Our 2021 supply chain order that was adopted at our July open meeting, the Reimbursement Program Policies and Procedures public notice that was released on August 3rd, and the cost catalog. Okay, a few of the questions. One question we've been getting a lot is what forms of documentation are going to be required as part of my application to support eligibility and documentation of existing equipment? So to prove that you are a provider of advanced communication service, that you'll be validated against the FCC Form 477, Local Telephone Competition and Broadband Reporting Filing Information Form. If you have not recently filed your Form 477, please be prepared to provide supporting documentation that demonstrates your eligibility. This documentation, like I said before, can include information from your website that describes services that are provided to customers, a catalog of your services, or the annual public financing reports that demonstrate the number of your customers and or your services that are provided. What are the covered Huawei ZTE equipment or services? So FCC Form 5640 requires you to show that you have Huawei or ZTE equipment or service that's obtained on or before June 30th, and to identify your existing equipment. For example, the make, the model, and the serial number when available, and the date that it's obtained. Some of the supporting evidence could include the architecture or network configuration diagrams, your equipment inventory lists with asset level identification, for example, serial numbers, your equipment specifications for existing equipment, and purchase orders or other documentation such as invoices that provide the equipment specifications. And last, photographs. What forms of documentation will be required to support your cost estimates? Documentation to support the cost estimates will be requested as part of your FCC Form 5640 application, as we walked through earlier. Now, during that filing window, applicants may use the cost catalog to support requests if quotes or other documentation is not available during the time. Vendor quotes must be provided for costs not included in the cost catalog or for estimates that differ from the average cost estimates in the catalog. Just to bring that back up, you may rely upon the cost estimates in the cost catalog as long as your estimate is below the average of the range for that particular equipment or service. If your estimate is above the average cost for that cost range for that equipment or service, you will need to provide supporting documentation. Vendor quotes must be provided for eligible expenses before the applicant will be reimbursed for actual costs. Equally important, what costs are not going to be eligible for reimbursement? So technology upgrades. The FCC is only issuing allocations and disbursements up to the amount of a comparable replacement using a costs reasonably incurred standard. So costs that are incurred above and beyond the reasonable cost of a comparable equipment will be borne by the provider. Some of the examples of these technological changes that the FCC has previously said are upgrades and are not comparable replacements are if a carrier wants to replace microwave backhaul with fiber backhaul, or to replace last mile fixed wireless links with fiber to the premises. That's considered a technological upgrade, and you will be only reimbursed for the costs up to the comparable replacement. Now, carriers are welcome to do so if they would like to upgrade to other technologies, as long as they bore the cost and explain that in the application so that we understand what's happening. Customer premises equipment. So costs that are associated with the removal, replacement, and disposal of non-Huawei or ZTE customer premises equipment are ineligible for reimbursement of the program. So we've stated, and just want to reiterate, that wired and Wi-Fi and wireless routers that constitute CPE are not reimbursable under the program. So a question we've been receiving a lot is, should providers file at the holding company level or at the individual subsidiary? So as we discussed when we walked through the portal, we encourage providers to submit a single consolidated application at the holding company level. However, providers are permitted to submit at the individual and subsidiary level if they would like. If you are going to apply at the subsidiary level, you are going to be required to identify your holding company FRN under the real party and interest information section of the FCC Form 5640, which we just went through. If you're applying at the holding company level, providers will need to provide a listing of the FRNs of the subsidiaries that are covered by their application, which you can include as an attachment in the application, and the attachment option as we showed below, in the portal, which is at the bottom of the page. Are expenses related to financing a line of credit or bridge loan reimbursement? So if the program participant that has begun the remove, replace, and dispose process prior to applying for and receiving their funding allocation from the reimbursement program, and you require a line of credit or bridge loan to do so, the origination fees, the commitment fees, and other fees and expenses that are associated with that loan may be reimbursable. Now, this is important. This is going to be considered, like many things, on a case-by-case basis. Participants will need to submit the supporting documentation. For example, a cover letter that details the need for the line of credit or the bridge loan, how that funding is being utilized, and something that demonstrates that the reimbursement is being sought only for the fees that occurred pre-allocation. Any fees that are incurred after you receive your allocation will carry a presumption of being unreasonable and accordingly will not be reimbursed. So please keep that in mind when you try to file for these reimbursement claims. The next question we've been getting a lot, can a provider be reimbursed for the cost of in-house labor? So the cost of a salary of an internal employee for the time that he or she works exclusively on tasks that are directly related to the removal, replacement, and disposal project may be reimbursable. The program participant will be required to submit documentation that shows hourly rates, time spent on the removal, replacement, and disposal project, and any other information that will allow the fund administrator and any program auditors to substantiate the costs that are incurred. Overhead and ongoing business expenses that are not directly attributable to the removal, replacement, and disposal project that would be incurred regardless of participation in the program are not reimbursable. So some examples of these non-reimbursable costs include general business operations, administrative, accounting, rent, utilities, insurance, and normal system maintenance. Providers are not permitted to sell services to themselves, and employees are not permitted to sell consulting services to the provider. When can providers submit reimbursement claims for actual costs incurred? So participants in the program can submit a reimbursement claim request after you have incurred expenses and received the funding allocation. You can submit as many reimbursement claim requests as you need as you incur expenses throughout the reimbursement period. And you're going to be required to link your actual costs incurred and the supporting invoice documentation to the itemized cost estimate. So as we talked about earlier, and I just want to reemphasize, you must file at least one reimbursement claim request within 1 year of receiving the allocation notification. Following that 1 year of the following 1 year after the initial disbursement of your fund, you have to complete the permanent removal, replacement, and disposal of covered communications equipment services, unless and until you request and receive a term extension from the FCC. Note that a request is not enough to toll the 1 year period. You have to have the request granted. Participants cannot submit reimbursement claim requests for costs that have occurred after your remove, replace, and disposal term. So please keep an eye on that term and make sure that your timeline that you submit in your application process has planned it out so that you'll be able to complete it within 1 year. And we will be providing detailed guidance on how to submit reimbursement claim requests, including another webinar when we get closer to the reimbursement window to talk through and ensure that any other questions will be answered by parties as they look to be reimbursed for reasonable costs that are incurred as part of the removal, replacement, and disposal program. How often can a provider revise their cost estimates? So applicants can revise your cost estimate as many times as you need during the filing window. And once applicants have submitted their application and while it's under review, so this is prior to us deeming it eligible and receiving notification, you cannot amend your cost estimate unless you specifically ask by a request for information to revise your estimate, or you've notified the fund administrator via the help desk of your intent to amend the application. So just to be clear, before you submit your application, you can revise it as many times as you need. Once you have submitted it and reviewing it, you cannot do so unless we specifically ask you to do so via request for information, or you've notified us via the help desk of your intent to amend it. After the allocation is granted and throughout the reimbursement process, you must revise your cost estimate if either your costs are not fully supported by a vendor quote, or if your vendor quote's cost has changed. So an updated current vendor quote must be filed with us prior to submitting the reimbursement claim that's associated with the vendor or supplier. And just as a general matter, any amendments to the application request for funding allocation that would result in an increase to the total estimate will be denied. So just want to re-emphasize that any amendment to your request for allocation that would result in an increase to the cost estimate will be denied. So if your cost estimate has been approved during the estimate review phase, will all invoices that are associated with that cost estimate also be considered reimbursable? During your estimate review phase, the FCC and fund administrator will conduct a detailed review of all estimates that are submitted, sending requests for information as necessary. When the participant later submits the reimbursement claim request for any expense that was approved during the cost estimate review phase, that submission will be reviewed for sufficiency of documentation and consideration of whether the participant has made any changes in its transition plans as indicated through other submissions or modifications. If the actual cost of the equipment or service is increased above what the participant estimated, or the participant purchases equipment or services that are different from what it reported when submitting its cost estimates, you're going to be asked to revise and resubmit the estimate to reflect the updated understanding of expenses. The FCC and fund administrator will review this documentation and recommend a payment for those revised expenses that are deemed reasonable But important, the funding allocation will not be adjusted once issued. So going back to the last slide, any amendments that would increase the allocation are generally going to be denied, and funding allocations are not going to be adjusted once you're issued. So please make sure that your application, when you submit it, is full and complete, because once it's issued, you do not have an opportunity to go back and ask for more money, at least within this particular filing window. If an element of the verified cost estimate was based on the cost catalog price, does the provider need to submit a copy of the vendor quote when requesting reimbursement? Yes. The reimbursement program participants must submit a copy of the vendor quote by filing a modification application before filing a reimbursement claim request for any claims for which the cost estimate was based on the cost catalog. Question near and dear to many applicants' hearts: when will you receive your reimbursement payments? So providers that are deemed eligible and receive a funding allocation can submit invoices for reimbursements as soon as you receive your allocation. Remember, once you submit your first application to receive your funding request, that will start the 1-year window for completing the process. So keep that in mind. Reimbursement claim requests will be reviewed by the fund administrator, and the FCC will ultimately be the party that determines whether or not to approve them. Approved claims will be forwarded to the United States Treasury for disbursement, and program participants will receive reimbursement via ACH payment from the United States Treasury into the bank account they identified via the DUNS number that is on file. Participants can facilitate the timely processing of these requests by ensuring that all of your information is accurate, attaching any explanatory and/or documentary materials that are needed to justify your expense, and responding timely to any requests for information from the fund administrator. Okay, how do you submit your bank account information to receive your payments? As we talked about in the very beginning, you must register at sam.gov using the DUNS number that's submitted in your FCC Form 5640 application to be eligible to receive payments from the U.S. Treasury. If you do not have a DUNS number and a commercial and government entity code, please file now to do so. They may take some time to obtain, and you don't want to risk being ineligible to participate by not being able to include that information on your application before the filing window closes. When you register for DUNS in sam.gov, the applicants will have to ensure that the taxpayer identification number, or your TIN, that you input matches the TIN that's associated with the provider's FRN in CORS. And CORS is the FCC system. So please make sure that you look at this soon and do not wait till the last minute, because this can take some time and we don't want anyone to have any problems while they are working to input their financial information with sam.gov. A question we've been getting very much: is there going to be an opportunity for providers to batch upload their site locations and existing equipment in their application? Yes, you can. Excel templates are going to be available for download within application 5640, and you may bulk upload your multiple locations and existing and replacement equipment and services via that process. And earlier when we walked through the portal, we showed you how you would actually do that. What is eligible sensitive equipment and how does it need to be disposed? So as I've mentioned before, our guidance regarding eligible sensitive equipment is going to be addressed soon in a public notice. Disposal processes of such equipment will be dependent on the category of equipment, and more information will be included in that public notice soon. Are providers required to meet the executive order on cybersecurity and assessment requirements in order to do business with the government and or to obtain federal contracts? So in this case, providers are expected to act in compliance with any guidelines that are referenced in the third report and order, as well as our other report and orders, including the first and second NRPNs, as well as to be aware of any other actions that are required by the federal government. Are providers able to contact Huawei and ZTE for support after their applications have been approved if there are no billings or monetary exchange for their applications? So providers may need to work with Huawei or ZTE based on the terms of ongoing service or maintenance agreement until equipment and services have been decommissioned. So that is the last slide, the last of the frequently asked questions. So just as a reminder, anyone who has other additional questions should please email our supply chain reimbursement program help desk email at scrpfundadmin@fcc.gov. That they can call the help desk at 202-418-7540. And that phone number is manned from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Eastern, Monday through Friday, outside of federal holidays. And you can go to the fcc.gov/supply chain website for more information, including this presentation and any other documents related to the program that we'll be posting between now and the filing window opening. The filing window, as announced earlier, will be opening on October 29th, 2020, and will remain open until January 14th, 2022. And the portal to participate in the window will also be available at fcc.gov/supply chain. So please reach out to the help desk if you have other questions. We expect this presentation will be uploaded to the FCC's website within a day or two, so please check back for that. And keep an eye out for the public notice announcing the filing window that we just announced, as well as our frequently asked questions that will be posted on our website later today. If you have other questions, please feel to reach out to me or our FCC team alongside the help desk, and we'll be willing to point you in the right direction. So thanks again for listening. We look forward to getting this process going. We're very excited to continue to work with you to ensure that our networks are safe and secure. Have a very nice day and enjoy your week. Thanks.